Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, for 30 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. I thank my colleagues for coming down here and talking about the importance of farming in the United States. One of the things we're dealing with, obviously, we talked about it, some fertilizer shortages. I know that firsthand, seeing some of the farms in the district I represent out in West Texas and so forth. We've got a lot of issues we've got to address. And I just want to note, as a Texan, we had my fellow Texan down here just a little bit ago, that here we sit again. Here it's March 31st, in an empty chamber again. You know, it's the close of a quarter, you know, a fiscal quarter. Members got their places to go, their dinners to go to. We just ran through a handful of votes today, no amendments, no debate. Here's the People's House in all its glory. No debate, no discussion. Do we have a single debate here in the People's House about what's happening at our southern border today? Any discussion at all? Does the Speaker of the House of Representatives give a rat's rear end about South Texas or the rest of this country? About the ranchers that are dealing with a flood of people coming across our border, endangering them and their families? No, they don't care. They don't care at all. But I can tell you, we in Texas care. And the leadership of this body better start caring soon. And let me just say something to all my fellow Republicans who just funded this government 2 weeks ago. Those of you who cut a deal with the devil, you're responsible for this too. You funded this government. You funded the government that's allowing people to come across our border, that's empowering cartels, that's allowing migrants to get abused, that's causing ranchers to lose their livestock, ranchers to be endangered, fentanyl to pour across our border. And now this administration has the gall to shut down Title 42 while Americans are still wearing masks on airplanes, while we still have men and women in uniform being forced to get a needle stuck in their arm with the power of government. And the leadership, so-called leadership of our government, has the gall to shut down Title 42, the one thing allowing us to stop the flood at our border even partially. March of this year, right now, March, 200,000 apprehensions. 100,000 turned away under Title 42. But now the head of the CDC, in coordination with the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, is saying we're going to stop using Title 42. Well, then what in the hell are you going to do? Nothing other than process more immigrants coming across our border who are not truly seeking asylum. But that's what's happening. And what's actually happening at our border right now is that there's shootouts going on as we speak on a daily basis between the Gulf Cartel, it's technically the cartel, Jalisco New Generation, but Gulf Cartel, CDG, warring with the Cartel del Noreste of Los Zetas. And we're talking about dead people. Dead bodies, people getting shot in their car, bullets firing, flying all over our southern border, dead individuals, this young girl here, head blown off. All of this is happening every single day, all while American kids are dying with Xanax laced with fentanyl. And again, I want to be clear here. When you take Title 42 away, you, Secretary Mayorkas, you, CDC Director Walensky, you, my Democratic colleagues who are countenancing it and funding it, you, President Biden, when you take away Title 42, the blood is on your hands. Dead Americans, dead migrants, destroyed communities in Texas, empowered cartels, making literally last night, talking to people coming across the border, saying they're spending $3,000 to $5,000 to come up from Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, 13,000 apprehensions from Russia in the last 5 months. We're about to see an unprecedented explosion on our southern border. But again, this administration not only doesn't care, it's purposeful. It is 100% purposeful. Endangering the people of the United States, endangering migrants while in the false name of compassion saying it's good for them, empowering cartels, knowing they're doing it, knowing they, for the most part, do not have a legitimate claim to asylum. They're purposefully not enforcing the laws of the United States, purposefully not using the tools at their disposal, like now ending Title 42. And for what reason? For crass political purposes. That is your modern Democratic Party. Using migrants, using them for political purposes and endangering them and Americans in the process. It is a gross violation of the oath taken to defend the Constitution of the United States. It is fully and entirely impeachable, and every Republican should be agreeing to impeach Secretary Mayorkas on day one when we come into this body and we're in charge of the House of Representatives next January, after the absolute feckless destruction of this country by an incompetent, destructive Democratic majority in this body, an incompetent, destructive, and flat-out reckless administration refusing to enforce the laws of the United States. But that is what is happening. Everybody says, oh, you're going down, there he goes, ranting on the floor again about the border. Well, excuse me, but it's Texas. And Texas needs to be starting to take a little action to tell the rest of this country to shove it up its rear end, because Texas is taking it on the chin. Because the leadership of this country is forsaking Texas, hurting Texas, hurting my neighbors, hurting my community. And it's about time that it stops. And it's about time that Republicans on this side of the aisle stop giving lip service to border security, choose to actually do their job and not fund the government that is refusing to enforce the laws. I listened to Republican leadership down here on the floor a few weeks ago trying to tell me, oh, thank me for giving us more money for ICE and Border Patrol. Well, how the heck is that working out now? More money for more processing of more migrants getting abused by cartels? More money for more processing of more migrants to come into Uvalde, Texas, where the mayor just texted me 5 minutes ago? Tell them, in case you're wondering, that's you Democrats across the other side of the aisle, tell them, and by the way, Republican leadership, tell them to come and see the, I'll edit his remarks, crap show they have created, 500 to 1,000 a day in Eagle Pass and Del Rio, no vetting. These are human beings, Texans, people we represent, our communities. But I promise my colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't give a whit. They sit in their smug chairs in their committee hearings saying, oh, this is all made up. There's nothing to it. It's all lies. Just like the lie that President Biden said and his press secretary said when he accused Border Patrol agents of whipping people. It's a flat-out lie. Where are those Border Patrol agents now? Have they been returned to their job? Has a report come out? No. I'd like to yield to my friend from Virginia who accompanied me on a trip to the border about a month ago or so.
Yes,
and
sir.
He's a good friend, and he understands what's actually happening at our border, and I'd like to yield to my friend from Virginia.
Thank you to the gentleman from Texas. We don't have a finer patriot and a more courageous warrior for freedom in the Congress, and I appreciate your leadership on this and so many issues, and I appreciate you leading this discussion here on the floor tonight. Never in the history of the country has our own president done more to intentionally harm the country than this president has done in his first year in Congress. Never in the history of the country has our own president done more to harm the United States than this president has done willfully, intentionally, than what he's done with the border in his first year. we're averaging 7,000 illegals across the border a day right now. The administration's admitting that. They're allowing 7,000 illegals across the border a day. I had a constituent say to me on the phone just 2 days ago, nothing this administration is doing makes sense unless they hate the country. Nothing that this administration is doing makes sense unless they hate the country. Whether you're talking about the crime crisis, the inflation crisis, our diminished standing on the national stage, the spending crisis, the energy crisis, what we're doing to American energy and making us depend on foreign nations who hate us. But I think at the top of that list is what we're doing at the border. When I ran for the first time 2 years ago, I identified the greatest threats to the country, I believe, our education system, indoctrination of our kids, K-12 and college campuses, our runaway radical spending that's bankrupting our future, and then our immigration and border situation. And nothing has changed my mind to that effect in my first year here. I've been to the border 4 times. I'm well aware that Virginia's 5th District is not geographically, physically located at the border. But we just had an MS-13 gang member convicted of murder in my hometown of Lynchburg, Virginia, who illegally came across the border. This president's policies are making every town a border town, every state a border state. Everything and everyone that comes across that border comes under the control of the Mexican crime cartels. And it's threatening the security of our nation. It's an economic security issue, it's a health security issue, and it's certainly a national security issue. And the projections that I'm seeing with the ending of Title 42, the egregious attempt to end Title 42, projections I'm seeing is going to take it from 7,000 a day to 18,000 a day. 7,000 a day to 18,000 a day, perhaps even tripling what's already happened. We had 2 million illegal crossings a year ago. Extrapolate that out for 4 years. Are we going to allow this president to have 8 million come across at the current pace? My most recent trip to the border that my friend from Texas was mentioning was to Del Rio, Texas. He led a trip to Del Rio, Texas. You might remember that's where we had Bidentown just a few weeks ago with 20,000 Haitian migrants assembled under the bridge there in Bidentown, Del Rio, Texas. Well, while we don't have that still today, because they distributed those migrants, those illegals, into the interior of the country, which they're doing all the time, by the way, flying and busing illegal aliens in the dark of night, wherever they want to go, throughout the country, with no even requirement of a court date to appear. It's a pinky promise that we'll get back with you in the future and give you a date to appear. So while we don't have 20,000 in Bidentown under the bridge right now in Del Rio, Texas, right through that corridor, Border Patrol and the ranchers and the sheriffs that were there told us it's 1,000 a day through there. So every 3 weeks, you've got a repeat of what we saw with Bidentown just a few weeks ago in Del Rio, Texas. Does this administration care? Every resource they have committed or directed to that border has been to facilitate, to willfully, purposely facilitate more illegals crossing into our country and to hide it from the American people. To hide it from the American people. There's been no effort by this administration in this president's first year, to stem it, to stop it. Instead, they try to facilitate it, hide it from the American people, and now they want to make it worse, 2 or 3 times worse, with what they're doing with Title 42. So with that, I yield to the gentleman from Texas or the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Well, before I yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, which I'll do momentarily, I just want to pick up on something the gentleman from Virginia said and see if he would agree that if Title 42 goes away, our country is completely open to anyone who wants to come in. Would the gentleman agree?
Absolutely.
Because virtually everyone who has been turned away has been almost entirely done under Title 42,
That's
correct?
Right.
Now, for the listeners at home, Title 42 is a health code provision allowing our officials in government to turn people away if we have a communicable disease environment like we do during the COVID pandemic. Now, we can do it for any number of communicable diseases, but we've got that in place now. And under Title 42, that has been roughly half of the folks been turned away under Title 42. Would the gentleman agree?
Yeah, but they're just turnarounds coming right back.
So to that point, would it surprise the gentleman that under the administration we have turned away 1.7 million people under Title 42?
Since 2019, when that was instated, right?
Yeah, Title 42 has been used more than one, including the time under the Trump administration, 1.7 million times during the pandemic. All the people that were turned back would likely have been let in and released into the United States under this administration. Now, some of those are repeats.
That's right.
But something along the lines of 1 million people that would have been released into the United States last year. Does the gentleman agree?
Absolutely.
And then one other point. Of the people that have come into the United States and are being encountered, these are all not just nice people looking for a job, are they?
160 different countries.
160 different countries. Roughly 10,763 criminal non-citizens and at least 3,662 have been arrested thus far in fiscal year 2022. The combined timeframes include roughly 85 convictions of manslaughter or homicide, 604 sexual offenses, and 2,892 convictions of illegal drug possession and trafficking, based on reports at least 14 illegal migrants who are on the terrorist watch list were stopped at the southern border in fiscal year 2021. But the biggest problem is what?
Gotaways.
The gotaways. The more than 500,000 known gotaways, known gotaways last year. So if we've got people we're catching on the terrorist watch list, if we've got criminals convicted of sex crimes, convicted of murder and manslaughter that we're catching, but that's all people that Border Patrol are running across and they're often turning themselves in. All of those known gotaways, do you think those are just the angels seeking a nice job?
These aren't the ones dressed head to toe in camo with the carpet shoes on who are evading capture, are they?
It would be.
How about that?
Now I'd like to turn it over and yield time to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, one of the great patriots, and I'm proud to call him my friend.
Well, I thank my friend, Mr. Roy from Texas. He's been the consummate crusader on this issue, and if not for him, this would even be more ignored in Washington, D.C. than it is already. And I just think about a scant month and a half ago or something, the President of the United States stood right there and talked about securing the border. It's unfathomable to me. We used to not say lie in the world of politics about your opponent or the other party or whatever, but I don't know what else that is other than a lie. And look, I come from Pennsylvania. We're not on the border where Mr. Roy represents, where his community and his state's being completely overrun. Pennsylvania is far from the border. We got Route 81. We got Route 83. The fentanyl comes up, right? The president took an oath to faithfully discharge the laws of this country, but just abrogating them. You just wonder, who's he representing? Whose citizens is he representing? Because the people in my community, the people all across the country are dying at record levels from drugs coming across the southern border, and nothing's happening to stop it. It's not only people coming here illegally and taking your jobs, and all these different languages that your school has to teach now. Somebody's going to pay for that. Who can afford this, and whose job is it to safeguard America? If it's not the president's job, whose job is it? Like Chip Roy's trying, Bob Good's trying. Well, we can't keep Title 42 in place. Even better yet, the question should be, why isn't Remain in Mexico in place? Seek asylum the correct way. Stay in the country, the first country you come to, if you're indeed oppressed in a political, you're suffering political retribution for your beliefs or religious persecution, the first country you come to. But the first country you come to when you travel through Mexico, when you fly into Mexico from one of the other 160, 190 countries on the planet, isn't the United States. It's Mexico. Yet the president says, the border's open. These people aren't coming to the White House, ladies and gentlemen. They're coming to your house, coming to your community. They're not going to Joe Biden's house in Delaware, not coming to Pennsylvania Avenue, coming to your house and your community. And they're bringing the drugs with them, human trafficking, and for goodness sakes, your taxes. Half the people on this side of the aisle just supported, 75% of the people on this side of the aisle just supported more spending for this. And you know what it does? Bob Good's right. You're not going to see them all piled up under the bridge at Del Rio, because we're going to hire more people to move them more efficiently into your town, because they don't like that look. It's not hired to stop them. They're hired to more efficiently have them come to your town, your community, including the people on the terrorist watch list, criminals, the fentanyl, the human trafficking, coming to your town. Well, thank you, Mr. President. turn it back over to my friend from Texas.
Well, I'd ask my friend from Pennsylvania if he's aware that our colleague and colleague in the House Freedom Caucus, our friend Yvette Harrell from New Mexico, introduced legislation a year ago, actually over a year ago, to require the use of Title 42. Is that right?
That's right. And all we need is enough people to sign it. Look, whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, these folks are coming to your town. The fentanyl's coming to your town. The overdoses are coming to your town. All you have to do, if your leadership says we refuse to move this bill that the American people want, maintain this Title 42, all you have to do is go down and sign that piece of paper, and we can do it. Leadership can't hold us up. But they don't want to do it, do they?
They do not. And so I just want to make sure for every American out there, just to understand the truth, if you are disgusted about what's happening at our border, if you are concerned about what's actually happening to our communities, there is a way we can solve this problem without Speaker Pelosi making the decision. Because, see, that's how things work, right? We don't ever debate. We don't ever amend. We never actually have discussion in the People's House. The Speaker in a back room decides what happens on the floor, vote yes or no, walk out and give a press conference. But we can do something about that. There's a tool. It's called a discharge petition. We have a discharge petition at the desk to try to empower the actual representatives of this country. We have 200 and I think now 8 Republicans on that discharge petition.
How many Democrats?
We have 0 Democrats, not 1 Democrat on that discharge petition. Now, I want everybody to think about that. The Democrats in this body apparently are so beholden to the radical idea of wide open borders, not implementing Title 42, while Americans are being forced to wear masks on airplanes, while Americans are getting a jab needle stuck in their arm by force of government if they're in the military, border patrol, or any other federal employee, while there's still a federal health emergency in place under order of the president.
Well, we're firing people that were on the front lines at the beginning of the pandemic without it, where there was no vaccine present, right? They went out and risked their lives, not knowing what they were dealing with, and now, unless they take the jab, now they're out of work.
And so while that's in place, we have a discharge petition where we can bring to the floor and vote to force enforcement of Title 42 in this country, and not one of our Democratic colleagues will join us in that effort. We have 13.
Wouldn't it?
It sure
13
would.
plus 8, 208?
It sure would. I think there's somewhere around 50 Democratic members from border states, if you count New Mexico, Arizona, California, and Texas. So where are my Democratic colleagues in border states? I think they ought to be asked. I want to know, why won't my Democratic colleagues from border states or anywhere else in the country say they believe that we ought to enforce Title 42? Because guess what? There are a few senators who have said so. Isn't that right?
There's a few senators. I think there's a few representatives that said so too. Now, they can put their money, so to speak, where their mouth is. You can say it, but you can take some action. That talk is cheap, right? Take some action and walk down there and sign the paper. And once one does, maybe a few more will, because their constituents, their bosses, their citizens, their communities are being wrecked too.
And it is a way to wrestle control of the People's House away from a handful of self-anointed individuals who are wrecking this country in the name of so-called democracy. My friend from Virginia, agree.
Absolutely. You mentioned Secretary Mayorkas. He has said the border is secure. The border is secure, he has said, when, as you know, we have lost operational control of our border. The Mexican crime cartels are making hundreds of millions of dollars a month off sex trafficking, drug trafficking, child trafficking, human trafficking, you name it. Everything that comes across that border comes under the control of the Mexican crime cartel. There's no humane component to it. They're finding dead bodies at the border of people who were trying to, they got, starved or or dehydrated, or they just couldn't make the journey, or something happened to them on the way. And you talked about Remain in Mexico policy. Instead of Remain in Mexico policy, the MPP that was in place under the Trump administration, here we've got the United Nations using our own resources that we pay the United Nations to help illegals cheat our asylum system. So the United Nations is taking resources that the United States is giving to them to use to train illegals on how to cheat our asylum system and how to gain access into our country by claiming asylum. And then the Democrat Party 20 years ago, passed a law that prohibits the requirement of proof of citizenship to vote. Now, of course, they don't want any ID in order to vote, and you've got the president promising amnesty to anybody that's here illegally. Do you think there's incentive to cheat our voting system and to vote illegally when there's no requirement of proof of citizenship, there's no ID to vote, and you've got the promise of amnesty? We've essentially got illegals with a license to vote here in this country right now, and here we want to continue to ramp it up to take it from 7,000 a day to an estimate of maybe 18,000 a day by eliminating Title 42.
Would the gentleman also agree that it's not only the UN that your tax dollars are going to for, we're actually, in this body, they voted recently to pay for attorneys to go help those folks that came across the border illegally navigate the system. Now, you go try that. You go break the law wantonly and then appeal to your federal government to pay for your attorney to get around the law that you just broke wantonly.
Both of my friends, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, the gentleman from Virginia, you guys are both fathers, correct?
Indeed.
Yes.
Do you think that there is anything compassionate? When my colleagues on the other side of the aisle like to talk about their compassion for migrants who are seeking to come to this country, do my friends think there is anything at all compassionate about a little girl getting raped in a stash house in Houston, Texas, as we speak? Or being driven up and put into the sex trafficking trade up I-35 or across I-10 in the southern part of the United States, or trafficked to anywhere throughout the rest of this country? Do you think that's compassionate? Do you think it's compassionate for a young woman to be getting shot up in a cartel warfare happening at South Texas, happening along the Rio Grande in northern Mexico? Is that compassion? Is it compassion?
What about the rape trees? We've been to the border. You've seen the little shoes all stacked up at the border. These are little children. And Representative Roy is absolutely right. And, you know, as trophies, can you imagine your little girls or anybody's little girls, their little girl panties hanging from a tree as a trophy? This is what our colleagues on the other side of the aisle refuse to acknowledge, like it's not happening, like it never happened. But it's happening every single day. Somebody's got to do something about it.
Is it compassionate for the young man or young woman of the 100,000 or so last year who died from drug overdoses to take Xanax and it be laced with fentanyl and die? Is that something that is compassionate, my friend from Virginia? Do you think these are compassionate things to be doing?
The number one killer of Americans between age 18 and 45 last year was drug overdoses. And yet we're allowing dangerous drugs, the most dangerous drugs, fentanyl and other dangerous drugs, to stream across the border. The only way you get across the border, the Mexican border in the United States, is to pay the Mexican crime cartels. Border Patrol and the local sheriffs will tell you, if you try to cross apart from the cartels, they'll kill you. You come either beholden to them, essentially an indentured servant, with pledge of your family back home if you don't have the cash up front. They will kill your family if you don't pay. Or you work it off. You work it off by trafficking drugs across, or trafficking children, or trafficking women across the border. Nothing compassionate about that.
One of my good friends who was a former Texas Department of Public Safety expert on these issues dealing with cartels just sent me a text showing me video from last night at the border and individuals they're recording saying they're paying $3,000 or $5,000 to get across the river. How is that compassionate? They're going to have to make a monthly payment to cartels. And you know what? A lot of those payments are going to come in the form of sex trafficking, labor trafficking. Right. And I just think, I think we got about a minute and a half left. I would just say, and I thank my friends for joining me down here on the floor, that this is a solvable problem right now. Yeah. Again, this could be stopped right now. It could be stopped right now. This hour, this moment. But where is President Biden? Where is Secretary Mayorkas? Other than purposely ignoring the laws of the United States to endanger the American people and the migrants who seek to come here. Where are they? And why shouldn't we be impeaching Secretary Mayorkas for failing to faithfully execute the laws of the United States, causing death and destruction to Americans' property and to American people in the form of drug overdoses and in the form of the endangerment of our citizens, and again, the migrants who seek to come here? I would ask that question of all my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. You can take this back and wrestle it away from the administration. Sign that discharge petition. Let's have a vote. Let's have a debate. What are my colleagues afraid of? The truth? What are they afraid of? The rule of law? What are they afraid of? A secure America? Migrants who get to come here safely? Put aside the politics and stand up for our country. That's our job as members of the House of Representatives, and I thank the gentleman from Virginia and Pennsylvania, and I yield back.
The member has yielded back. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president. Members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair and not to a perceived viewing audience. Pursuant to Section 11B of House Resolution 188, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.